executive mentor, author, and founder of Quiet Brilliance Consulting. She's trained in psychology. She has more than 40 years of experience in her field. She's one of the top authorities on introversion in the workplace, helping smart organizations maximize the potential of these quietly brilliant people who generate revenue for the company, unlock innovation, and expand leadership. As a thought leader, she was a pioneer in the field of stress management, helping to transform workplace stress from a fringe topic to a challenge recognized as impacting companies globally. Her training in the latest neuropsychology means her company can provide cutting-edge training for individuals and organizations reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath, as they strive to rebalance, re-energize, relaunch, and create a new supernormal. Now, I just met Lynette for the first time, and I asked her for some information. She said, well, you know, my power animal is a butterfly. And I like butterflies because they go through a remarkable transformation. But she said that she's a butterfly because she's flitted from one adventure to another. So please help me welcome Lynette Crane.
Thank you so much, Ella, and thank all of you. And I see my screen is up. Actually, I said, I'm a butterfly because I've flitted from one topic to another my entire life. I've been a dancer, I've been a singer, I've been a model, I've been a psychologist, I've been a designer. But my motion has always been in the upward direction, and that's what I'm about today. So let me see if I'm going to work this properly. Science and spirituality together at last. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my journey in which I encountered scientific spirituality, and it was a long journey. When I was a child, I believed in magic. Well, I think all children do, but I had a special edge. I had a special father. He could talk to wild animals, and they would talk back to him. I could hear them. He could feed them from his hand. He could make anything grow in the earth. He seemed to make magical things occur around him, but when I look back on it, I realize his real magic was that he brought joy to everything and happiness. Our house was filled with laughter and with humor. It was because of him that I went to bed willingly at night, because I would lie there with my eyes closed and have the most wonderful fantasies. My major fantasy was that I lived in a rose. I had a house in a rose in which I was the princess of the rose as I wandered from one rose-colored room to another. I always had a consort who supported me totally in this rose. I was never alone. I felt totally loved. It was a joy to go to bed and go through this fantasy. Another fantasy I pursued was jumping off the garage roof and flapping my arms wildly, sure that at some point I would actually get a loft and be up there with the birds. And I kept trying. And when I was 10 years old, he died. And it's as if all the magic was sucked out of the world. He hadn't taught me the secret of making magic, and I hadn't fathomed it myself because I always thought there were years to learn it. Well, I went through some very bleak years trying to understand life. I wanted to understand how you levitate. I wanted to understand how you really understand people and get close to them and connect with them. And that's, I think, why I became a psychologist. And I got into science because in science you do delve deeply, get into people at the cellular level. And that satisfied me for a while. And then several crises occurred in my life, and I would suspect everybody in this room has had a crisis that brought them to spirituality. It's a typical journey. My crisis was that my workplace became so toxic I was afraid to go to work. My dancing, which had been a career and by then was a hobby, was taken away from me by injuries. And my marriage, which had started out to be so promising, suddenly turned to be toxic. And I went through a very acrimonious divorce. And at the end of all this, I was exhausted. I remember leaning on my kitchen table, too tired to do anything, even think. And I looked at the air in front of me, and I became aware that the air wasn't transparent. It was as if there were tiny, tiny particles constantly in motion. They weren't white, they weren't black. I couldn't tell you what they looked like. I couldn't tell you today because I still see them, but they were particles in motion. And I'd been reading about quantum physics, and I thought, well, gee, there's something interesting here I had better look into. And I did, but at that time, quantum physics and the spirituality we know today were in their infancy. So they weren't exactly going to tell me how to fly or how to set up wonderful, deep, enriching, intimate connections, which is what I wanted to do. So I started to read books. And I read books. I read one by a writer who was a channel for a being who either came from another planet or another time. And I tried to read the book, but it seemed very obscure to me. It went on, and I wasn't finding information I wanted there until I came to the appendix. And the appendix of this book was written as if it was a booklet for children. And I will tell you what it said. It started this way. From the moment you are born, your life is charmed. Yours and everyone else's. And you must never forget it. Atoms and molecules go singing through the miraculous air and turn themselves into rocks and trees and dogs and people. Move your arm, and the air molecules stop being your arm, and you charm the air into being your arm over here. You charm the air. I was enchanted. How can I do that? The book went on with some other memorable phrases, one of which was, hate is love looking for itself everywhere, except where love really is. And love is what you feel for yourself when you're in harmony with the universe and you know it. Well, this spurred me on to do more research. I read more books. Many of them confused me. I went to psychic fairs and workshops. I held crystals in my hand and admired their beauty and smelled incense and tried visualizations and affirmations. And I didn't seem to be getting any closer to what I wanted. Remember, it was levitation and deep connections with people. I had friends who tried other things. I had one friend who went to India for a year and lived in an ashram. I thought that was rather extreme and uncomfortable. I didn't want to do it. Another of my friends climbed the Himalayas into Tibet and felt very transformed. But I didn't think that was possible for me as a tenured teacher to say I'm going to Tibet for a year. I delved deeply into world religions, going back to their ancient roots, and they were all saying the same thing about particles moving or something moving that we could affect with our consciousness. But they had such elaborate rituals that seemed so complicated, I wasn't quite convinced they were going to take me to where I wanted to be. So at last I enrolled in a psychic school and spent two and a half years becoming a psychic minister in a church. And I learned how to read chakras, and I learned how to read past lives. And you know, sometimes I felt like a fraud. I wondered if I wasn't just making it up. Was I really in touch with all of this information? Now, my fellow students didn't seem to be as intimidated as I was. They would say, do you know there's a being on your shoulder talking into your ear? Not my experience, or your third chakra is very orange today. I didn't see that either. I began to count myself a spiritual failure, although I was overlooking the fact that I healed quicker than anybody around me, and that when I wanted something material, it appeared in my world very quickly, but I wasn't counting that. So sadly, I went back to doing what I was doing before, but I was more enlightened. I brought some of these techniques into the teaching and coaching I did, but I just wandered away thinking, well, spirituality isn't at a point where it can help me very much right now. Because my question was always, how? I always wanted to know, how do we do this? Give me a clear map. I wanted the superhighway to spirituality. I didn't want to fuss around with little things that might get you there in the long run. I wanted to know how to do it. Well, as I was giving up, something very interesting was happening. A doctor named Alexander R. Moore. Is that up there? Okay, thank you. Okay. Dr. Alexander R. Moore investigated the powers of the heart, and he came out with an astonishing paper in 1991. Do you know that your heart contains 40,000 brain cells capable of thinking and remembering? Remembering things that your brain doesn't remember. And do you know that those cells react more quickly to the outside stimulus than your brain does? Now, it's not a lot of a gap of time. We're going to see it's a very important time gap. And your heart has much stronger and more numerous neural connections to the brain than the brain has to the heart. Well, that's kind of interesting, because we've been taught in the West that the brain is the command center for the body and the heart just pumps blood. Now, indigenous peoples and Eastern cultures have long known something different. We have ignored it at our peril, I might add. And so I'm delighted that at that time, the Heart Math Institute began to investigate the heart and its powers. Now, they were working with, under the guidance of one of my former professors at Stanford, Dr. Carl Pribram, a world-famous neurosurgeon. And he insisted that from the start, they follow the most rigorous scientific processes, observing carefully, measuring, quantifying. They have done that, and so at last I was delighted. My butterfly soul had found a place to rest that was compatible with what I wanted, to combine science and spirituality, because I've never felt they should be separate, and yet in our culture they have been for at least 150 years. Let me go on here. Okay. Now, in 1991, the World Health Organization called stress a pandemic. And I want to go into this because it's really going to be important for what we're learning today. In 2019, it was a pandemic costing billions of dollars, taking millions of lives. I mean, stress is the number one cause of disease. Genes are a 1% cause of disease. The rest is stress. And wellness programs that we've set up have not addressed this. How do I know this? I was a pioneer in the field. I developed what I think might be the first college course on the psychology of stress in the 1970s. And I had to write the textbook because it didn't exist. And I knew from the start that it's not just about calming down in the face of adversity, which translates to me as somehow adapting to a dysfunctional world, but rather that we needed to know how to create the life we wanted and get the things we wanted. That was the real cause of stress, being powerless and not being able to create a life we want. So, here's what we're dealing with today. I mean, if that was 2019, that was before they knew about all of the things that have happened to us since 2020. In every migrations of populations, economic crises, climate crises, all of it going on, and of course, the big one, the big surprise. So, let's move forward here with something that HeartMath did very early on. When you go to the doctor, I think that probably the first thing that happens besides you do your copay and bring out your insurance card is that they take your blood pressure. And if your blood pressure is low, very nice. And if your blood pressure is high, so this, if the medical profession paid more attention to it, might alert them to something quite different. Our body basically functions in two modes, the protective mode and the growth mode. In the growth mode, you know you're in the growth mode when you feel wonderful and you feel full of energy and you are healthy and you seem to be able to fight off any kind of illness. And what's happening is that in the growth mode, your cells are regenerating. Your body is healing itself constantly from the onslaughts. I mean, we're constantly surrounded by viruses or eating something or falling into something that isn't good for us, but our body fights it off. And in the growth mode, your body is actually emitting hormones that not only make you feel wonderful and happy, but they actually are anti-aging. Versus the protective mode, which used to be called the fight or flight syndrome. And people would tell stories about how our cave ancestors had to flee from saber-toothed tigers, and in order to do that, they had put on an extra burst of strength. So the blood flow and all of their resources went to the powerful muscles of the back and the legs and so on. And they shut down the rest of the system because if you're running from a saber-toothed tiger, you don't have to digest, right? You're going to be digested. You're not worried. You don't want to fight. You don't need to fight off viruses, and you're running from a tiger. So the first thing that shuts down is your immune system, and with it, much of the rest of your body. The protective phase or mode costs us. We secrete cortisol, the stress hormone. We secrete other things that undermine our body's health, and you are aging rapidly. I wonder how much people have aged during this pandemic. So, here's a little bit of research that may surprise you. Not only did HeartMath call attention to these two modes of functioning, but they did this study. Subjects were seated in front of a screen which brought up pictures that were either uplifting, put you in the growth mode, because the emotions that put you into the growth mode are everything from calmness and tranquility up to happiness, enthusiasm, joy, and love. And you can find photographs that evoke these emotions. The things that put you into the protective mood include frustration and anger, and depression, and low-level anxiety, and sadness, and even boredom. Now notice that some of these emotions in both the protective and the growth mode have high heart rate and high blood pressure associated with them. But they also, both of these modes have emotions that are associated with low blood pressure and low heart rate. Okay, so the subjects are looking at pictures that arouse these emotions, both good and deep. We call them depleting emotions or renewing emotions. And they're being presented with these pictures, presented randomly, and the researchers have taken DNA from the subject and put it in another room. Eventually, they put it in another building, and finally, they put it 400 miles away. And here's what happened. A subject would look at an emotionally arousing picture, and their DNA would change simultaneously. Not even time for this to be transmitted through the air by some mysterious means. Simultaneously, their DNA separated from them showed the emotion that they were feeling. Now, if they were having a renewing emotion, the DNA was spread throughout the gene in a pattern that Dr. Bruce Lipton, father of epigenetics, tells us is very healthy, and the gene is expressing itself fully. I wish I had pictures to show you here, because in the depleting mode, when they were shown given pictures that gave them depleting emotions, the DNA crowded over into a corner of the gene, sort of looking like somebody crowded against a cave wall hiding from the saber-toothed tiger. It's very graphic, and it happened immediately. In other words, your emotions are affecting your health directly all day long, because the defective gene is you're regenerating cells, you're constantly turning, you're repairing, but DNA is the blueprint from which your cells are made. And if the blueprint is very defective, you are turning out defective cells. And we are dying because we are turning out defective cells because of stress. So let's go on. Your brain can't solve your stress problems, and here's why. Your brain consists of two major portions: the neocortex, the inventive creative front, very small, very modern, and it's this area of the brain that you use to plan, to bring your dreams about. But it's often overshadowed by the rest of the brain, sometimes called the monkey brain. It has different names. I'll call it the hindbrain. It's primitive. Here's how the primitive brain works. It sets you up to live efficiently so that you don't have to get up every morning and learn to walk and talk all over again. So it does it by setting up stimulus-response relationships. Touch a hot stove when you're a toddler. You'll never do it again. If you live in Minnesota, you learn never to lick a frosty pole again, right? One time. So you've got the stimulus, the hot stove or the frosty pole. The response is two parts: your action, or rather reaction, and that reaction is accompanied by emotions, which are carried along. Next time you see the hot stove or the frosty pole, you recoil. Now, we learn a lot of things automatically with these pairs. You also learn 4 times 4 is 16. And once that takes a longer time to learn than the hot stove phenomenon. But once you've learned it, it's there automatically. Before somebody asks you the question, before it's out of their mouth, you've got the answer. You have a lot of these automatic reactions. Stand up in the 3rd grade to talk, and some kids laugh. And what do you learn? Stimulus, standing up to talk. Reaction, other people laugh at me. Emotion, embarrassment, uneasiness. Next time you stand up to talk, you might be addressing an audience of people who are very sympathetic with you, think you're terrific, but you may have the same flutters because you've learned that stimulus-response relationship, and it is automatic. So your brain puts you, it's like autofill on your phone, which drives me crazy. I start to write a text message, and it fills in the whole thing as if it knows what I'm thinking, and it doesn't. But it's there. We have all of these stimulus-response relationships set up in the hindbrain, and they go on and on and on because by age 35, about 90 to 95% of your behavior is automatic. You're not even questioning it. So the response you make may not really fit the situation that's occurring right now, but your brain does it anyway, and you don't even question it. If you've ever driven home from work, for example, meaning to stop at the drugstore or the library on the way, only to discover you're in your driveway before you even knew it, you're familiar with this phenomenon. But, if you get up in the morning and look at the day and feel a sense of dread, you're responding to the same kinds of patterns that would set up in your brain. And we try as we might to change them, but you can't. Because, as Bruce Lipton likes to say, there's nobody in there. That's just a room that's playing recordings that have been set up. And you can't address it and go in there and say, turn off the recording, erase it, splice this in instead. That's not how you do it. But we have been ignoring this in modern life. Let's see. Okay, the superpowers of the heart. I love this. We have done ourselves a great disservice in Western culture by emphasizing the brain over the heart. We have damaged ourselves and our health. First of all, emotions are the poetry of our life. One person on being told, we're really just beings of energy, We don't have to live in these bodies. And he said, but how could you taste chocolate if you were just a being of energy? How could you know what it's like to be caressed by another person if you're just pure energy? So we live in these bodies to experience life, and then we cut ourselves off from it. I'm working with a male client now, and it's very sad because he has been cut off from his emotions, as so many men are, from the softer, tenderer emotions. When you can't talk about something, it's hard even to think about it. It's hard for him to hold a conversation. One of the challenges that men face is finding someone who is a conduit for their emotions, connecting with a woman or someone with feminist behavior so that they have some attachment to emotions. And I've known too many men who, if they were deprived of a relationship, divorced, widowed, or just separated, they immediately go out and find someone else because they can't stand to be alone without that conduit to emotion. Women, we challenge women in different ways. We make them feel that any behavior, any emotion associated with power and authority is bad, and we will punish them for it, and they will be punished for it. And so that keeps women from feeling their power, and it keeps them from it helps them make the same kind of mistake that men make. I've known too many women in my life who, intimidated by using their own power, find a powerful mate so that they can, by association, feel powerful or feel protected. Two incomplete halves do not make a whole. And so one of the things that I love about Heart Math is that it teaches us to manage our own emotions and to find the power behind being able to feel emotions fully. Good, bad, good emotions, the ones that make us happy, and bad ones, because if we do it the right way, we learn from them and get out of them quickly. Okay, so let's talk about coherence now. People use the word coherence today in a lot of different settings. Coherence means that in a system, all the parts of it are working smoothly together. So instead of going opposite directions, these rowers, for example, probably started out as a mess. I don't know, maybe their oars hitting each other, some of them digging too deeply in the water, others of them skimming the water. But basically, they are now coordinated and skimming through the water rapidly with much less energy waste. So the first thing you can do when you get into coherence, and we're going to do an exercise about this in just a minute, is that you stop losing all the energy you're losing every day. Because when your heart and your brain are working in opposition to one another, it's like driving with one foot on the brakes and the other one on the accelerator. Have you ever tried that? Go home and abuse your car that way, and you'll see what happens. It kind of shakes all over, makes a terrible noise. A lot of gasoline is being wasted, and you're going nowhere. So we want to coordinate. We want to get ourselves together, and then we can see what the power of coherence is. So here is just a printout of what these states look like, incoherence versus coherence. On the left, you see a jagged. That's the kind of a reading that heart math gets when someone is incoherent. Remember, being in any one of those emotional states and more that I mentioned, anything from boredom up through sadness, up through anger, and so on. The one on the right is when people are in coherence. Now, most doctors have not seen that diagram on the right. Most cardiologists have not seen that diagram on the right. At conferences, I'm told speakers presenting this information will find that doctors come up after the talk and say to them, "Why haven't I seen this?" And isn't that a good question? Okay, we're going to do this coherence technique, but I want to tell you in advance what we get from coherence. We get clarity, we get deepening intuition, and we get self-regulation of our emotions. So let's go ahead and do the heart math quick coherence technique. If you will sit up with your feet flat on the floor in front of you, and do not cross legs or arms, because any place you have pressure in your body will call your attention to it. And you want to be aware of your heart, because your energy goes where your heart is. So close your eyes. You can do this exercise with eyes open, but let's start eyes closed. And focus your awareness on your heart. You can even touch your heart. And now I want you to start breathing more slowly and deeply than you usually do, breathing through the heart, breathing in 5 counts through the heart and out 6 or 7 counts, and doing so at your own pace. So you start now, and I will be silent for a minute or so. Now, bring into your heart a renewing emotion. Appreciation and gratitude are the easiest. They can go all the way up through love. Bring that renewing emotion into your heart and savor it. And slowly come back to this focus. Now that's just the start of self-regulation, and if that were all there were to it, you might think I can do that with my meditation or the music I listen to. But we go much farther than that, and I would like, with your permission, to take you through some more points before we get to some of the really big emotions that are most important to us, such as love. Do I have her permission to skip love for a minute here? Okay, Ella's nodding yes, so I assume she's answering for the rest of you. She's a real leader, you know. So let us look at, oops, got to point that way, clarity. You may have seen this meme on the internet, not the picture, I had that made for me, but between every stimulus and response, there is a pause, there's a space, and then that space lies your power and your growth. Okay? Here's what happens when you are in your heart and you are coherent and you are in a situation where your brain might have taken over and confused you. My first experience of this that was really memorable came when I was talking to a friend of mine who was very agitated and wanted me to pay attention to a concern of hers that was really, honestly, not very important to me because I was involved in some very major, dramatic family issues that I had to solve. And she wanted me to turn my attention to hers, which had to do with a vacation. And I kept trying to tell her patiently, I cannot, I'm under stress, I need to complete these other tasks. And she finally exploded at me. She was, I think, in a state of incoherence, and she said something about my being, I expected unselfishness from other people, but I was so selfish. Now, that kind of charge at any other point in my life would have put me immediately into the protective mode, defending myself. I mean, I've been a very defensive person in my life. Do I have anybody in here match that? Yeah. Very defensive immediately, because that's how quick it is. What happened amazed even me. I was standing there in a circle of calm. I could feel it around me, like a protective circle, as if things were happening at a distance. Time slowed down. The only thing I was feeling was curiosity. And I said, wow, this doesn't sound like anybody I want to be. Can you give me some examples so I don't do it again? And she couldn't. I was in coherence. It impressed me as I've had more and more experiences. As you practice coherence, you find this happening, not only in the moment. I don't know how many of you, but introverts, I'm an introvert, and introverts particularly have experiences where people say something and we're just dazzled. And an hour later or 2 days later, we think of what we should have said. We can't do it on the spot. In coherence, you can always handle those situations, well, pretty much always, once you really get deeply into it. So it's well worth pursuing. Now, this technique is being taught to emergency responders all over the United States, including in the 5 branches of military. That includes the Coast Guard. It's also being taught to some police departments in the United States. Sadly, not yet in Minneapolis. But can you see the value of having someone who's all primed, ready to defend themselves, having been taught to defend themselves, having a weapon in their hands, being able to have a second or so of clarity to make a different choice, a choice that keeps them from shooting an innocent person, or even a not so innocent person, but one who does not deserve to be shot in the streets. This is a very powerful tool. Another way it's powerful is that when you get clarity and start living in clarity, you start to review situations you're in, and you start to see them from a very different point of view. Long-term relationships, suddenly things appear very differently, and you're starting to figure them out from the intuition of the heart. Because remember, the heart has memories that the brain doesn't have. So let's go to intuition. We have local intuition. What does that mean? It's based on the heart and its memories. You might come up with a bright idea that's based on something you encountered years ago, but it wasn't associated with a strong emotion at that time, so it does not leap immediately to mind in a new situation. But when you're in a state of coherence, you have access and you do innovative things. Or you might come up with a bright idea and find out somebody else came up with it at the same time. And this happens all the time all over the world. Two scientists come up with the same idea and there's a race for the Nobel Prize. Two inventors and there's a fight in courts over who gets the patent. Is this just a coincidence? No, non-local means just that. The heart has connections that we saw the connection when we saw the DNA change in response to emotions. Because, yes, Virginia, there is a matrix. It's not just a movie title. It's real. It's often called the field of infinite possibilities. Infinite possibilities. You are connected, if you but know it, to a field of infinite possibilities. You need to learn how to access it. Okay, let's see what we have here. Surprise myself. We are energy beings, and we all have an electromagnetic charge. Our brain has an electromagnetic charge due to the firing of the neurons. Our heart produces an electromagnetic frequency due to the beating of the heart. When we can coordinate them, we have a very powerful tool for reaching out into the field. And that includes those around us. We are a part of the field here, and we are already connecting with one another with electromagnetic frequency, whether we're aware of it or not. Let's see. I certainly wish I could see this slide. Yes. This shows you what we once thought was the electromagnetic field of a human being. It was about 3 meters in every direction around the body. HeartMath was asked, why is it 3 meters? And they said, well, honestly, that's as far as our measuring devices go. So they worked on that a little further, and they now do not know how far we are projecting our electromagnetic frequency, possibly to infinity. We do know, here's an example of non-local intuition. Mothers particularly may know that their child on a battlefield in Afghanistan has been injured. They'll sit up in the middle of the night. Well, mothers and babies are particularly quantum entangled. That's where two particles have been close together, and now even though separated, they react the same because the child has been part of the mother's body. But you can be quantum entangled with people you've been closely associated with, even not that closely associated with. Have you been paying attention to that? Lynn Taggart, who works in the field, told us in one class, do you know you're trespassing in other people's minds right now? Do you know other people are trespassing in your mind right now? Awareness is a wonderful thing. It's very powerful. Okay. The language of the heart is emotion, and the language of the matrix is emotion. And we have been, by our training, denied full access. Everyone has an electromagnetic frequency. At HeartMath, they measure people's emotional states, and the frequency, and they can tell you what emotion somebody is feeling by looking at their electromagnetic frequency. Every emotion has an electromagnetic frequency. This is going to be important when we go back to the matrix. Okay. The electromagnetic frequency of love is 0.1 hertz. We know what love is like. And by the way, The electromagnetic frequency of the Earth is 0.1 hertz. Remember that statement in the little booklet? Love is what you feel for yourself when you're in harmony with the universe and you know it. So let's talk about these frequencies and let's talk about the matrix, and I hope I have something. Yeah. Well, here we are in a group. 3 people have been trained in heart math and are coherent. 1 person isn't, but is becoming coherent by association with those who are. You can affect the world around you. As more and more of us get into coherence, we will be hopefully bringing about a more peaceful world. Okay, let's see. Let's go back. Let's talk now about the field of infinite possibilities. When you are emitting the electromagnetic frequency of a certain emotion, you are calling out to the events in the field that have the same frequency. You are calling them to you. Are you angry? That's your electromagnetic frequency. Guess what you're finding in the world? More things to make you angry. Are you fearful? Are you loving? Are you safe? I have a neighbor, and she's rather fearful and anxious person, and she hates going to the local strip mall where there is a supermarket and a Target and so on, because she always has bad experiences. People accost her, they say things to her, they ask her for money, somebody pushed her butt down, her purse was stolen at one time. She told me she went over to the police car that's always parked there to complain, and they just took her complaints very lightly. She's afraid to go there anymore. Now, I go to the same strip mall, and I just have pleasant experiences. I just meet friendly people, or at least people minding their own business. I see families with their children shopping. It all makes me feel very warm to see all these people. I always feel safe, and I have never, ever seen a police car sitting in the parking lot there. They may, but I've never seen them. How can we have 2 such different experiences in the same place? Quantum experiences. She is calling to her what matches her emotional tone. I'm calling to me what matches my emotional tone, and I feel pretty safe almost everywhere I go. I live on the edge of Powderhorn Park, and when we had the encampment there, which unfortunately drew drug dealers and all kinds of I took a walk in the park every day, and people said, "How can you?" And I just felt safe, and I was safe. And there were some decent people there camping out who were not there through any fault of their own. So, am I getting to this? Let's get. So, what do you want to bring into your life? Is it worth it to you to learn to self-regulate your emotions so you can bring into life what you want? Now, self-regulation means bringing on the emotion you want regardless of external circumstances. That means you don't have to have someone loving you and showering you with love to be filled with love and to feel safe in that love. It's taken me a lot of my life to learn that. I was the kind of person who was devastated if I wasn't being given a lot of love by somebody else. I was frantic. I was alone. I felt isolated. I don't anymore, because we are all connected through the field of infinite possibilities, and there's a ton of love out there. You just have to learn to feel it and project it. How do you do that? Well, how do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time. You start with appreciation and gratitude. Start reflecting on people who have made you appreciative and grateful. Start feeling some love for them. Start escalating your ability to maintain this state, both in the quantity, the amount of emotion you can feel, and the length of time you can sustain it. It won't happen overnight, but I guarantee when you start doing this, you will start feeling much better and even wonderful all the time. And it's within, we have the whole roadmap for you to get there. Here's another thing you can do with self-regulation. You can, like a dial on a radio, remember those old-time radio? You can turn the volume up or down. Well, you can take an emotion and you can tune it up so that it becomes more joyful and enthusiastic. You can turn one down. For example, I don't think any emotions are bad. I think anger is a form of energy. And if you have something that genuinely makes you energy, something in the world that is unjust and you're angry, you can turn it down to the point where you can deal with it in an effective way that handles that injustice rather than sputtering because you are in a state of incoherence. This is a very powerful tool, so let's look at how we practice coherence. In the first place, it's recommended that you practice 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at night. That doesn't sound like very much, but if you're trying to sustain coherence, believe me, it's a long time to maintain that state. And many experienced people only do that in the morning and the evening because they're able to sustain it during the day. Now, the problem with many practices, including many meditations that people make, is that they do an hour in the morning and they hope that will sustain them during the day. Excuse me, remember this brain back here? It's constantly working to bring you into alignment with those old tapes. So you may do your meditation in the morning and feel mellow, and during the day, those tapes are constantly chewing at you. So if you do 1 hour of good practice in the morning, you have 23 hours of the bad stuff. Which do you think is going to win? You need something that's portable that you can carry with you. So besides the 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at night, experienced practitioners, I know in one office they've decided they will practice it when they go to the restroom. The whole walk and everything will be being in coherence, breathing in and out through the heart. You can do it with your eyes open. It's a good idea to do it with your eyes open because let's say you're going to meet someone and the person is a bit of a challenge to you and you feel in conflict with them. Well, start doing your breathing in and through the heart, feeling gratitude. With your eyes wide open, you can be holding a conversation with someone and they don't know you're using the technique. You can be driving down the road in bad traffic and you'll be a much safer driver if you are in coherence. I also think of wasted time. How much time do you spend in doctors' and dentists' waiting rooms or hairdressers' salons? And I see people almost uniformly pull out their phones and start looking at them, start looking at Facebook. You could just sit there with your eyes wide open, nobody knows you're doing it, breathing in and out through your heart and getting coherence. Every bit of practice helps. And my favorite is what I call interrupting myself. During the daytime, when I suddenly feel that I'm doing some behavior that is not conducive to coherence, I will immediately stop and start breathing in and out through my heart. Let's say I start to get a flash of anxiety, or a little voice says, oh, well, that won't work. It hasn't worked before. I immediately do it. Sometimes I find myself making a judgment about someone else. We protect ourselves by making judgments. Well, that person doesn't, I don't want to be around that person. I don't like that person. Those judgments isolate us. They make us feel as if we're not connected to anything. Now, there are times when your vibes, which I hope you become very sensitive to, will tell you this is a dangerous situation. But much of the time, it's not. We just cut ourselves off from people. So when I find myself making a judgment about someone because they're different from me, or they look different from me, or they're doing something different from me, I immediately get into coherence. It is very, very much worth it. Almost time. We're out of time? Oh, my Lord.
Wow.
Can I have just a little bit more? Is it, how about you people?
What do you think?
If you have to leave, I will
Okay.
stay in coherence, but really.
All right.
Heart Math is telling us how, and they've developed techniques more than this one. We have a whole array of techniques with which you can learn how to do this yourself. They have tools. If you're on this super highway, you want to know, how am I doing? Am I really gaining traction? Am I really getting someplace? And they have tools that can show you the same diagrams that I just showed you. You click one, connect one to your earlobe, connect it to your phone that will have an app on it, and you can actually take those readings that most doctors haven't seen. So you can tell that you are progressing, that you're able to stay in coherence longer. And I'm the how-to lady. I'm the guide for the roadmap. And I really wanted to take you into the matrix. Does anybody want to take a little trip into the matrix with me? Yeah, because I'm told at conferences, quantum physicists even will stand up and say, there's a field out there. Excuse me? Out there, as if we're observers looking at it? Other people will say, we're in the field. Well, that's like sitting in a hot tub and molecules, you're aware of the molecules of water, all same, swirling around you, but you think you're an inert lump. So I'd like to do a little activity for a moment, if you will bear with me. Put your feet flat on the floor. Let your eyes close. Breathe in and out through your heart. Because this is a concept that's difficult to grasp, but I think we need to start doing it. Okay, your body contains roughly 50 trillion cells. Each of those cells contains roughly 100 trillion atoms. And those atoms aren't something you can dissect or cut up or peer inside. They are filled with swirling energy, like miniature tornadoes or cyclones. You are pure energy circulating, connecting directly with the field. Photons are emerging from the field and collapsing, constantly in motion, constantly changing in response to your emotions. What was your prevailing emotion in the last week? What do you want it to be in the coming week? Because remember, you're in charge. Because from the moment you are born, your life is charmed. Yours and everyone else's. And you must never forget it. Atoms and molecules go singing through the miraculous air, turn themselves into rocks and trees and dogs and people and you. A miraculous being of energy capable of creating. Do it wisely. And thank you for sharing your time with me today.
Keeping track of the time, but I got so wrapped up in the talk. I mean, there was so much in there to try and unpack so many nuggets to unpack. So if you have time, now is the time we'd like to ask for your donations, because we're totally funded by your donations. That's the primary source of our income, and it allows us to keep the lights on, the doors open, and to bring speakers such as Lynette here. So give what you can. Appreciate it.
Years old with a flour sack cape tied all around his neck. He climbed up on the garage, he's figuring what the heck. Screwed his courage up so tight that the whole thing come unwound. He got a running start and bless his heart, he headed for the ground. Well, he's one of those who knows that life is just a leap of faith. Spread your arms and hold your breath and always trust your cape.
All right. Well, thank you. So if you will join me in blessing our offerings, repeat after me. Perfect love flowing through me blesses and multiplies all that I give, all that I receive, and all that I am. Thank you. And as part of our tradition, we try to circle up, and if you don't feel comfortable holding hands, at least just circling up. Maybe, I don't know if we can all get around the center. Okay. And then Lynette will leave us with some parting words. Oh. Okay. We don't have microphones, so it's up.
It's off?
It's on.
It's on. It's on. Okay.
Stretch.
Mm-hmm.
We got it. We did it. Okay, we did it.
Let us be deeply grateful for the fact that we are a part of this wonderful matrix, sharing love, knowing that we are always connected and will never be without love. Okay. Amen.
All right, thank you.